It's Good Friday. Jesus has been in detention all evening, but now it's daybreak, and the priests and the temple police drag Jesus bound to Pilate. Because they couldn't enter the praetorium because of their Jewish religion, and if they entered it, they would be considered unclean. They had Pilate come out, and they turned Jesus over to Pilate. And Pilate brings in Jesus, and he questions him, and he can find nothing to condemn him for. Jesus remains silent before Pilate. So Pilate says, "Oh, Herod's in town. Let's bring him to Herod. He's the king of the Jews. This is a Jewish problem with something that has to do with their religion. Let him solve this problem." So they take Jesus to Herod. And Herod finds nothing to condemn him with, sends him back to Pilate. Pilate doesn't really know what to do. He knows he's innocent. He knows this man hasn't done what is worthy of death. Even his wife sent him a note and said she had a dream and that he was innocent. Let the man go. But Pilate was afraid of a riot. And he was afraid that he might lose his job if they get back to Caesar, that there was a riot here in Jerusalem. So he says, "I know what I'll do." He says, "I'll have this man scourged and beaten. And when they see him bloody, maybe the crowds will have pity on him." So he turns Jesus over to the Roman soldiers, who bring him to a room. They tie him to a pillar and they beat him and scourge him and play funny games with him. They say, "Oh, you're a king, are you? Then you need a crown. So we'll give you a crown of thorns." "And you're a king, you need a robe." So they found a purple robe and put it on Jesus and mocked him. And when they were finished with all their shenanigans and fun and games, they brought them back up to Pilate. And Pilate pities him, but doesn't know what to do because he doesn't have the courage to do what he knew was right. His job was more important to him than the salvation and the innocence of this man. So he brings him out to the crowd, and he stands there before the crowd, hoping that the crowd will have some pity. But they didn't. They kept yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." So he takes a bowl of water, washes his hands, and says, "I am innocent of the blood of this man," and turns Jesus over to the crowd. Jesus is brought to the bottom of the stairs. He's given his heavy wooden cross. Jesus begins his way up to the road to the top of the hill. He doesn't go very far. He's hungry, he's tired, he's in stress, he's in trauma. And the cross is unbearable because it's carrying my sins and your sins and the sins of the world. And as he's going along, the people are punching him and hitting him and spitting on him. They trip him and he falls. He falls for the first time. But he doesn't stay there. He knows he has a mission, so he gets up and he moves on. And as he moves on, he sees in the corner of his eye, standing on the side of the road, his dear mother. Her heart is broken. There's nothing she can do. All she can do is watch and just leave it in the hands of God. It's out of her control. And he looks at Mary and knows there's nothing he can do either, because he was here to do his Father's will. He goes a little further, and the soldiers are afraid that because he's losing so much blood and he's tired, they don't think he's going to make it to the top of the hill. So they pull out a man who looks like a foreigner, Simon of Cyrene, and they make him carry the cross of Jesus. And isn't that what we are to do too? Aren't we to help Jesus carry the burden that is partially ours? He goes a little further and he meets Veronica, one of those women who followed him through the years, who used to take care of him and fill his needs. And she didn't know what to do. She was overcome with despair. So she runs out and she pushes her way through the crowds and she pushes her way through the soldiers, and she whips off her veil and wipes the face of Jesus and gives him comfort. And Jesus is grateful. Jesus walks a little further. He falls. This time it's much harder for him to get up. The cross is getting heavier. He's losing more blood. He's getting weaker. But he gets up. And as he gets up, he sees the women ahead of him who are weeping and wailing. And he turns to them. He doesn't think of his own sorrow. He doesn't think of his own problems. He doesn't think of his own possibility of death. But he talks to the women and gives them comfort. He falls a third time, looks up the hill, can barely think whether or not he can even make it. But he crawls up to the hill. And when he gets to the top of the hill, they strip him of his garments, and he's exposed to the world. Doesn't even look like a human. He looks like a human scab. But that doesn't bother the soldiers. They take him and they throw him on that cross, and then they nail his hands and his feet. What an agony. But then they lift him up on the height of the cross, and he looks over Jerusalem, and he looks at the crowds of throngs of people below, and he says, what have I done wrong? I came here, and I've cured you. I've cured your blindness. I've cured your deafness. I've given you my love, and I've shared my Father's will with you. And then he looks up to heaven, and in a moment of desperation, he cries out to his Father, 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 what have I done? What have I done that you abandoned me? Yes, Jesus feels the pits of human despair. At this moment, he feels like he is all alone, and everything he's ever done was a failure. And then he looks down and he sees beside him a thief, Dismas, hanging there with him. And Dismas turns to him and says, Jesus, I know that I'm worthy of this punishment, but you aren't. You're innocent. And when you come into your kingdom, will you please remember me? And Jesus says, this day, before it is over, you will be with me in my kingdom. And then Jesus looks down and he sees his mother and he sees St. John, the only faithful apostle that was there to be with him. All the other apostles ran away. They were scared. They were afraid that if they killed Jesus, they would kill them too. And Jesus says to John, John, behold your mother. And he says to Mary, behold your son. And at that moment, Jesus was making sure that Mary was being taken care of. And at the same time, he's giving Mary to us to be our spiritual mother. He then cries out, I thirst. But he wasn't thirsting for water. He was thirsting for souls, because that's why he came. He came to thirst for our souls, to make sure that we would be back to heaven, because he is the living water, and he came to give us life. He then says, it is consummated. It's finished. Father, I've done everything you've asked me to do. I've tried to do your will, and now it's over. He bows his head and says, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He dies. He's taken down from the cross and he's laid in the arms of his dear mother, who once held him as a child, who cradled him and rocked him and brought him up. And now the prophecy of Simeon at the time of the purification has come true. Mary, you will experience many sorrows. They take him and they put him in a tomb. He's given everything, he has nothing, and he's being buried in a tomb that's been borrowed. Yes, Jesus gave his all. The tomb is sealed. The mourners move away. The end of Good Friday.